Hi, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. My name is Rob Scuderick. Thanks for joining me today. We are doing the start and sit video for week 7. So we're going to talk about some guys that you may want to consider sitting or starting. Now, when we talk about who you're going to sit or start, I think you need to contextualize this a little bit. And here's what I mean by that. There's so much I don't know about your league in terms of your scoring system, your bench depth, who's available on the waiver wire, things like that. So you're going to have to take this information and you have to plug it into your league. For example, when we say that you need to sit a guy, a lot of that has to depend upon who you have out there. And so even though he may have a great matchup, you may not have the bench depth or the availability in the waiver wire to pick a guy up, and you may have to roll with him. And so for us, when we say sitting a guy, it may simply mean to you need to temper your expectations. I'll give you an example. Let's look at Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper has really struggled this year. Now, I think he's going to pick it up. In fact, I think this week he's going to pick it up. But right now, he's a guy that, there's just red flags out there in terms of why he is struggling. But are you going to sit him? Well, when you consider that, let's say if you're in a 12-team league that requires 3 wideouts, which is very common, that means 36 wideouts are going to get started in your league. Do you really have a number 4 wideout that warrants starting over Amari Cooper? Probably not. So it means you're probably going to have to start him anyway just because of his talent, his upside, but you need to temper expectations. So once again, when we give you these things, just something for you to consider. Another thing we talk about in terms of all this, we may tell you that you need to sit a guy, but when it's all said and done, so we look at matchups, injury reports, a lot of things. But if you're looking at a guy that has maybe a great matchup, but it's going to be not getting a lot of targets, or he's not getting a lot of carries. If you have another guy who's got a really poor matchup, but he's going to get a lot of carries, he's maybe the primary running back, or he's going to get a lot of targets in the passing game. Volume and targets almost always wins out over matchups. Just consider that. So looking back at last week, I think we did pretty well. We missed a few, but for the most part, I thought we nailed our start-sit video. Hopefully we can do as well this week. Hopefully you guys are having a good week. Let's get going with Game 1. Raiders versus the Chiefs. So let's look at the quarterbacks. We'll break that down. Alex Smith had a decent week versus a Pittsburgh defense that going into the last week was number 1 in pass in terms of points allowed to quarterbacks. And he ended up with about 250 yards, a TD, and no interceptions. Now, he was always considered kind of a game manager. He was a decent quarterback in terms of football, but in fantasy football, he wasn't a real viable option. He was matchup dependent. Well, he's really developed into kind of a reliable fantasy starter at this point. Right now, his lowest point totals for the year are 15.1. His TD to interception ratio is 12 TDs to 0 picks. And so he's a guy you definitely can certainly think about starting out there. He's developed into a good fantasy option. The other guy out there is Derek Carr. Came back last week from a back injury. Struggled through 1 touchdown, had 2 picks. He looked a little bit rusty, maybe hesitant, maybe still a little worried about the back injury for whatever reason. But before he got injured, he looked really good. He's a solid guy. He's a good quarterback. We expect a rebound game this week against a Kansas City defense that allows 11th most points to quarterbacks. What about the running back situation? Well, let's take a look at running backs. You look at Kareem Hunt right now. Now, Kareem Hunt is what we call match-up proof at this point. He's a guy that you start every week. It doesn't matter who he's playing. You got to start this guy. Now, last week, he had 9 carries for 21 yards, which is pretty sad. That's 2.3 yards per carry. But it didn't matter because he went out and he had 5 catches for 89 yards. So he still had a good game in spite of his struggles running the ball. Another impressive statistic for him, it's been targeted in the passing game 23 times this year. And he's converted that to 21 catches. That's a great ratio. So he's a guy that even if he's struggling to run the ball, they involve him in the pass. He's matchup proof. He's a great running back. You got to start Hunt. Another guy out there is Marshawn Lynch. Now, Marshawn Lynch at this point, he's what we call touchdown dependent. But he's going to get the goal line carries. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see him go out this week and maybe get 15 carries, 65 yards, and a TD. He's not going to be great. He's beginning to really show his age. He really began to show his age before his retirement. His last year for Seattle, he really struggled. The yards per carry, I believe, were 3.3. And so this is a guy that is really on the downside of his career. But he is their guy that's going to get the ball between the tackles. He'll get the goal line carries. So you can start him, but you need to be, you need to understand that he's maybe a running back 3 at this point for this game. He's playing a Kansas City defense that allows the 5th fewest points to running backs. And so probably not a great option out there for you, but when there's so few running backs out there and they're scarce to come by, you could certainly roll with Marshawn Lynch. I would sit Richard, Washington, and West this week. I don't even consider them. As far as wideouts in this game goes, well, Kansas City's defense is a good defense, but they give up the 3rd most points to wideouts, and so obviously you're going to start Crabtree, and you're going to start Cooper. Now, Cooper has struggled, to say the least, but I think it's going to be kind of his coming out party. I expect him to go out there, rebound a little bit. I think he's going to have a decent week. He's got too much potential to sit anyways. Once again, you don't want to sit this guy, former first-round pick who's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. He's a guy that could easily go for 100 yards, 2 TDs, and what a shame to leave those points on your bench at this point. I would probably start him. You had Cordell Patterson. Cordell Patterson had a touchdown last week. He's a gadget player, and he's somebody who will get you occasional TD. He's not worth a start. In fact, he's not even worth having on your bench at this point. Now, Oakland's defense gives up the 7th fewest points to wideouts, so they've been kind of stingy to wideouts. So Tyreek Hill's a guy that you probably need to start. Once again, who else is out there that you're going to start over him at this point? But he really comes in as kind of a wide receiver too. If you're in a PPR league, if you're in a standard league, he kind of goes down to more of a wide receiver 3. He just he's got a lot of talent, he's got a lot of potential, but he has struggled at this point. Other than that, there's nobody on Kansas City that you want to start in terms of wideouts. As far as tight ends go, Travis Kelce is a must start. He's kind of a no-brainer there, and I would sit Cook. As far as kickers go, Harrison Butker, he's been kicking the last 3 games, and he came in and replaced injured Santos. And he's averaging 14 points a game. He's been really a revelation. He's been great. So Harrison is a guy that you got to start. Giorgio Tavecchio is a decent kicker. Week 1 he had 19 points. Week 2 he had 9. And really he's dependent on Carr. If Carr's in there and they're moving the ball, he's a decent option at kicker. If they're not, he's probably not. But at this point, I think he's an okay start. As far as defenses go, I would start Kansas City and I would sit Oakland. Let's go on to game 2. Tampa Bay versus Buffalo. Let's look at the quarterbacks. Well, Buffalo gives up the 3rd fewest points to quarterbacks. So we don't know what's going to happen with Jameis Winston. He's got a sprained shoulder. He may or may not play. So his backup, Ryan Fitzpatrick, came off a horrible year last year with the Jets. He looked okay last week in fill-in with Winston. But playing a Buffalo defense that's really good against the pass, I wouldn't even consider sitting Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now, if you are desperate, Jameis Winston is a guy that if he plays, you have to watch the injury report. Now, it sounds to me what they're going to do is he's not going to throw the ball all week until later in the week. They're going to try to rest up his shoulder. Now, if he plays, he's a guy that you could start, but there's a lot of question marks there. They haven't been great, so he's kind of on that fence as far as a guy you want to consider. Tyrod Taylor, would you start him? Now, Tyrod Taylor is going to be a darling pick for a lot of people because he plays the Bucs. Tampa Bay gives up the 2nd most points to quarterbacks. So it looks like he's got a beautiful matchup this week, but I have real concern about Tyrod Taylor. One, his best receiver, Matthews, is out. He's only averaged 182 passing yards per game. He's not great. His best asset is his legs. So if he's going to beat you, he's going to run the ball. That's where he has some value. So he's got a great matchup, but to me, he falls in our rankings this week in about 18 to 20 range in terms of quarterbacks. So you can start him if you need to, if you're in if you're desperate because of a bye week or injuries, or if you're in a league where you have to start 2 quarterbacks, definitely got to look at. But if you're in a 12-team league that starts 1, he's a guy that I wouldn't go with, certainly. As far as running backs go, McCoy is a no-brainer. Now, Doug Martin has a tough matchup, but he scored back-to-back weeks. And he's, once again, like we said, volume trumps everything. And right now he's a primary ball carrier there. He looks good. He's going to get the ball, even though he's got a rough matchup. He's looking spry, strong, quick at this point, where it looks like he's been in the league 5 years, and he's had 2 really good seasons. He had 3 really bad seasons. But right now he's looking like that rejuvenated Doug Martin that we've seen in the past. As far as wideouts go, there's nobody for Buffalo to start. Zay Jones has looked terrible. Guy can't catch anything. There's some other guys out there, Holmes, that are maybe all right options. But once again, it's hard to really nail down who's going to get the targets in that offense. So I won't even risk starting any Buffalo wideouts, even though they have a great matchup. Not saying there won't be wideouts that produce, but it's going to be hard for you to nail down who that's going to be. I could give you a couple names. I could throw them out there, but I'd rather have you look elsewhere. As far as Mike Evans has a tough matchup. You got to go with Mike Evans. Oh, you got to start him. Doesn't matter, even if he has a tough matchup. Now, Deshaun Jackson has been kind of all or nothing this year. And if you look at how he's been, he's a burner. They stretch the field, like to throw it down. So he'll have that game where he'll have the 50-yard touchdown, and he end up with 3-4 catches for 100 yards, but then he'll disappear for 2 to 3 catches for maybe 30 yards a game. And so he's kind of all or nothing. He does kind of a tough matchup. I would probably stay away from Deshaun Jackson. Then you have slot receiver Adam Humphries. Now, Adam Humphries has actually put up some decent numbers the last 4 games. He's been pretty consistent. I would start him in standard leagues. If you're in a PPR league, you could start him. Right now, he sits at about a wide receiver 5. As far as tight ends go, you got to start Cameron Brate. He's had TDs 4 weeks in a row, and he's kind of just become a very reliable, solid tight end. So he's a guy that you would go with. As far as kickers go, I would start Buffalo kicker Steven Hauschka, and I would sit the kicker for Tampa Bay right now. I wouldn't even bother with that. As far as defenses go, you would start Buffalo, sit Tampa Bay. There's no value in them right now. Let's go on to the next game. Chicago versus Carolina. So let's look at start sits in there. Well, Cam Newton at this point has been playing really well last 3 weeks. He's put up good fantasy numbers. Now last week he did throw a couple picks, but he still had a decent fantasy day. He redeemed himself. Now he's playing a surprisingly good Chicago defense. They've been good as late. They don't give up a ton of points to quarterbacks. But Cam Newton is far too talented, and he's playing too well lately to not start. So certainly I would start him. He sits at about 10 to 12 range as far as quarterbacks this week. You want to sit Mitch Trubisky. He didn't look great against the Vikings. The one TD that he had was deflected off the cornerback. Should have been an interception. Fell in his tight end's hand. Last week he looked even worse. Just terrible at this point. Mitch Trubisky's got a long way to go before he figures this out. As far as running backs go, Jordan Howard. Now, this is kind of fun for me. I have to say, maybe I'm being a little braggadocious here, but back in week 1, Tariq Cohen come out and he had this huge week, and people were saying it's a running back by committee, whatnot. We went out publicly a number of weeks and we said, and we were pushed back on that a little bit. We've been challenged by a few people that love Tariq Cohen out. Tariq is a great athlete. I think he's a guy that's got a good future here in the league, but I think they're going to see him involved in the passing game. So we came out and said, okay, this is not a running back by committee. This is Jordan Howard's team. Tariq Cohen is he's only 176 pounds. He's 50 pounds lighter than Howard. He's not going to become the running back. He's not going to see a majority of the carries. That's going to be Jordan Howard. And so we said that this is Jordan Howard's team, and then sure enough, it's played out that week. He had a good week last week. Now he had over 30 carries, and I think he had like around 150 yards. His yards per carry weren't great until he broke off a long run in late in the game there. And so Jordan Howard, just by volume alone, even though he's got a tough matchup against a Carolina defense that's decent against the run, you got to start him. He's going to see the ball 25, 30 carries a game, and so you got to start Jordan Howard. I would start Cohen in PPR league. He's not a great option. He's just about a running back 4 or 5 because, one, he's really pass dependent at this point. He's got value in the passing game, but with Mitch Trubisky struggling to throw the ball, that really devalues Cohen. So you could start him in a PPR league if you're desperate. I probably won't. I'd like to see them work some things out there. I'd like to see the quarterback play improve at this point. McCaffrey. Got to start McCaffrey, but only in PPR leagues. At this point, he's really just a wide receiver. They almost just should convert him to wideout at this point. He can't run the ball very well at all. In fact, nobody can on that team. Stewart's not running well. McCaffrey's not running well, but he is a PPR giant. So if you have McCaffrey and you're in a PPR league, I would start him. Stewart looks terrible. Sit him. As far as wideouts go, start Funchess and Benjamin. That's not a great start in terms of matchups for him. It's a decent start. Sit out Chicago wideouts. Charles Trubinsky figures this out. I wouldn't even bother. Kendall Wright's got some value there, but it's very, very low, and there's just too many question marks, so don't go with any wideouts in this game. As far as tight ends go, Ed Dixon has a very good matchup this week. You got to start him. Now, Zach Miller is actually about, besides Jordan Howard, is the one guy that you might consider starting. He's going to be a check down guy for them when Mitch is in trouble. A lot of times, quarterbacks like that, rookies, people that are new in the league that are struggling to move the ball, they'll throw to their tight end a lot. So Zach Miller would be your kind of your guy that you could start. He's had touchdown 2 weeks in a row. He runs at about a 15 or 16 in terms of our tight end rankings. As far as kickers go, I would start Gano. I would sit Barth. As far as defenses go, start Carolina, sit Chicago. Tennessee versus Cleveland. Well, as far as quarterbacks go, I would start Marcus Mariota. He looked rusty at times last game. He still ended up over 300 yards passing. He has a great matchup against a Cleveland team that gives up the 4th most points to quarterbacks. Now, right now, Cleveland gives up the fourth most points to quarterbacks. In reality, that would actually be worse. What's happening in a lot of games, like last game against Houston, Watson didn't need to throw the ball the second half because they were just destroying Cleveland. So I think those numbers actually would be worse, except the games that they have lost have been pretty lopsided at this point. And so they're terrible against the pass. So you got to start Marcus Mariota if you have him. You could start Hogan. Now, in fill-in 2 weeks ago, he looked good. Last week, he didn't look that good. So he's what I would call a deep, deep sleeper. And the only reason why you may even consider him if you're very desperate, he's playing a Tennessee team that is really bad against the pass. Tennessee's pass defense is horrible, so you could maybe start Hogan as a deep, deep sleeper. But once again, he's still sitting in around 25, 26 range in terms of quarterbacks this week. There are probably better options out there for you. As far as running backs go, DeMarco Murray is dealing with some hamstring issues, but it's hard to pass him up in this matchup, so I would start him. We expect him to get a touchdown, around 80 yards total. Now, the one concern that I do have is if this is a blowout, they're probably going to turn to the younger Henry just so they could rest DeMarco Murray and get his hamstring healthy. And so I would definitely start Henry. In fact, in this week, when you look at Murray or Henry, I would probably say that Derrick Henry is the better of the two as far as matchups go. I would start Duke Johnson, running back for Cleveland. He's on pace for 70 catches this year. He's a PPR stud. They'll probably be playing from behind, need to throw the ball, so Duke Johnson is a guy that you could start. You could start Isaiah Crowell. Now, I will say this about Isaiah Crowell. He's another guy who has struggled this year, but he's had double-digit carries in every game except for one. Once again, volume matters. So starting Isaiah Crowell is not bad. He's startable at about a running back 2 or 3. Wideouts, Rashard Matthews is an okay start. He's not a great start. And I think the reason why is because they spread the ball around there a lot. The guy that I like this week as far as wideouts for Tennessee is I like Eric Decker. Eric Decker looked really good last game. Now, early in the year, he was banged up and missed the first couple of weeks, and then, of course, Marcus Mariota goes down. So we really haven't had a chance to see those two build rapport. But last game, they really seemed to connect. They look good. I actually like Eric Decker better than I like Matthews this week. So I would start Decker. Matthews you could start, but don't expect a great week out of him. I would sit all Cleveland wideouts. Just sit them all. You have Lewis, I suppose you could start Ricardo Lewis. He's the best wideout for Cleveland, but none of them are great options. Tight ends, you could start Delaney Walker. I would sit the tight ends for Cleveland. Kickers, Suckup has been really the best kicker when Marcus Mariota has been playing. Suckup has been the best kicker in football in terms of points average per game. He's been phenomenal, so you got to start him. I would sit Zane Gonzalez. At defenses, I would sit both defenses in this game. The Saints versus the Packers. Well, who would you start? Well, you're going to start Drew Brees, obviously. Now, here's another one. Of course, we know Aaron Rodgers went down. He broke his collarbone. He's probably out for the year. And so they're going to turn to Brett Hundley. Now, it's not a beautiful pick. He's not going to be Aaron Rodgers. In fact, I would say he's not top 15 at this point, but he's right there in terms of a guy that is not a bad option for a fill-in, especially if you're in a league that requires 2 quarterbacks. I think he's actually going to have a decent game in this game. One, New Orleans very terrible. They're bad against the pass. They give up a lot of points to quarterbacks. He's a guy who's been in the league 3 years. He's been sitting there watching Rodgers. He's very good weapons around him. And so Brett Hundley is a guy that you could certainly start at this point. As far as running backs go, you're going to start Ingram. Ingram had a great game. He's a guy that has actually looked good. I was really surprised that they signed Adrian Peterson in the offseason because Ingram really seemed to be coming into his own last year at 1,000 yards rushing. He's developed into a good pass-catching back. Shocked about Peterson. The trade of Peterson really opens it up. Ingram had a great game last game. Another guy out there is Kamara. He actually had a lot of value in PPR leagues coming into this. And then last week, he had 10 carries for over 70 yards. And so he's developing more and more into an all-around back. He's going to see more and more looks, more and more touches. So Ingram and Kamara are guys that I would start. I would start Aaron Jones. I think he's going to be the lead back. In fact, what I expect is probably going to happen is they're going to want to protect Hundley at quarterback there. They run the ball a lot more. I think Aaron Jones probably gets the ball 15 to 20 times. And then Ty Montgomery is a guy that you could start. But what's going to happen is I think he's going to get a lot of looks in the passing game. Last week, he was out-touched by Aaron Jones in terms of carries and targets, but I think they'll see him more involved in the passing game this week. Wideouts. Who do you start at wideouts? Well, Michael Thompson, got to start him. Jordy Nelson. So anyways, sorry. Wideouts, you got to start Michael Thompson, Jordy Nelson, Adams are guys you would start. I would sit Cobb. Cobb was a decent option when Aaron Rodgers in there. Now he doesn't have a lot of value. He's a third wideout in an offense that's going to struggle to move the ball as well as they did with Rodgers. I would sit Snead. Now, right now, Snead is a better option than Ted Ginn, but last game he didn't see the field a lot. They said they're going to work him back in slowly from his injury, and so until he sees the field more and gets more targets, and we can see that he's involved in the offense a lot more, I would sit Snead this week. Ted Ginn Jr. Loses looks to Snead, so once again, there's kind of a battle for targets there. As far as tight ends go, Bennett, Fleener, they have good matchups this week, but they both struggled a lot this year, so I would sit them if you can. I'd prefer not to start them. As far as kickers go, Crosby and Lutz are both great starts, and defenses, I would sit both in this game. None of them are a real good option. Jacksonville and the Colts. As far as quarterback play goes here, well, Bortles really stinks. He's been brutal. He's not a great option. But Indianapolis gives up the third most points to quarterbacks. So there's kind of a risk here in starting Blake Bortles. But if there was a week that you would feel comfortable starting Blake, it would be this week that you could give him a role. Now, another thing you may want to monitor there is Leonard Fournette. He hurt his leg. In fact, hurt his ankle last game. He left the game. He did come back. He played. And then he was absent for the last drive of the game. So we're not really sure what's going on with his ankle. If Fournette sits, definitely ups the value of Bortles. Once again, he's a guy that sits probably around the 18 to 20 range in terms of quarterback rankings. Not a terrible matchup this week. But once again, it is Blake Bortles, and you got to temper expectations. I would sit Jacoby Brissett. He's got a nightmare matchup against a really good pass defense, so don't even think about him. Running backs go, obviously, Leonard Fournette. If he plays, you got to start him. Watch the injury report, see how his ankle looks later in the week. But he's a stud, so when he plays, you got to play him. I would start Ivory only if Leonard Fournette sits. If Leonard Fournette sits, you could start Chris Ivory. Otherwise, I wouldn't start. I would sit Gore. I would sit Mack this week. I think they're going to have a hard time, moving the ball against Jacksonville. As far as wideouts go now, T.Y. Hilton has a terrible matchup against a good defense, but T.Y. Hilton's far too good to sit, so I would start him, but I would start him with the idea that he's kind of a wide receiver 3 this week. I also start Hearns and Lee. Also concerned wide receiver 3s. They have a good matchup against the Indianapolis defense. It gives up a lot of points to wide receivers and quarterbacks. They're not great wideouts, but they have a good matchup this week, so you could start them as wide receiver 3s. I would sit all other wideouts. As far as tight ends go, you got Doyle and Lewis. None of them are great. I would sit both of those. As far as kickers goes, I would really sit them both. I would sit Adam Vinatieri and Josh Lambo, who signed this week to replace Myers. As far as defense, you got to start Jacksonville, sit Indy's defense in this game. The Cardinals versus the Rams. So let's look at Carson Palmer. Well, Adrian Peterson came last week, had a good week, but apparently still got some gas in the tank. And that's going to help, I think, Carson Palmer take some pressure off of him a little bit. Now, he has averaged over 315 yards passing every week since week 1. His TD to interception ratio is 8 TD passes to 3 picks, so he's looking pretty good. He's a guy that you could start against the Rams, even though the Rams defense is pretty solid. Jared Goff has got a good matchup this week. Arizona gives up the 7th most points to quarterbacks, so Jared Goff is a guy that you can start. As far as running backs go, you got to start Todd Gurley. That's a no-brainer. Adrian Peterson, he's going to get the carries, he's going to get the volume. I don't expect him to come out and do what he did last week. I don't know if it was his first week playing for a new team, adrenaline, what it was. He had a very good week. I think those numbers go down, but he's still the starting running back right now, so you got to go with him. I would sit all other backs. As far as wideouts go, you got to start Larry Fitzgerald. This guy is an ageless wonder. I'm glad he didn't retire. I hope he plays another year after this year. He's looking wonderful at this point, so he's doing great. Got to start him. I would start Woods. Now, when you look at the Rams wide receivers, you got Woods, Watkins, and Cooper Kupp. And of those guys, actually, of those 3 guys, Woods has become the most reliable of those. In fact, 3 of the last 4 games, he's had a better line than Kupp and Watkins. So he's looking really good. Now, Watkins and Kupp have more upside than Woods, but Woods is a safe pick at this point. So he's the guy that I would start. I'm not sure that I would start those other 2. You look at the wideouts for the Cardinals, you got Brown, and you got Nelson, J.J. Nelson. And so the Rams are pretty good against the pass. And then you add in the fact that between those 3 wideouts from week to week, you don't know who's going to get a majority of the carries, or not carries, but the targets. So there's a lot of question marks there. I really am not comfortable starting any one of those. If you had to go and you had to pick one of those wideouts, J.J. Nelson, Jerron Brown, or John Brown, I would start John Brown. He's probably the more consistent, and he's the better guy as long as he can stay healthy. I would rather sit all 3 of those guys and look elsewhere. As far as tight ends, I would sit all tight ends. As far as kicker, you could start Zuerlein and Dawson. As far as defense goes, they're both moderate starts. They're not great, but they're not horrible, so they're serviceable starts for both defenses in this game. The Dolphins versus the Jets. Well, here's what I do. I would sit both Cutler and McCown. Now, Jay Cutler, he actually looked decent last week. Had a good game. Now, the problem with it is he's been so he's been hard to figure out. Week 1, he looked decent, and then he came out the next 3 to 4 weeks, and he had some really good quarterback-friendly matchups, and he really stunk it up. Now, last week, he came out, and he looked decent. He did that without Parker. But right now, there's just too much inconsistency out there. I need to see a couple weeks in a row before I feel comfortable going Jay Cutler, so I would sit him, because the Jets' defense is actually not bad. Jets' defense is pretty solid. McDowell looked great last week, but he did it against a terrible, terrible New England pass defense, and so don't get caught up in those numbers. Miami's defense is a lot better against the pass. As far as running backs go, Jay's got a great matchup this week. You got to start him. Now, you look at the Jets running backs, you got Powell, Forte, and McGuire. This is another one, the 3-headed monster. Well, when they're all healthy and play, that really is tough for fantasy owners because they split carries and targets, and it takes away value from all of them. So if they're all 3 are going to play this game and they're all healthy, I would be hesitant to start any one of them. Now, if one of them's out, let's say if it turns out that Paul sits again because of an injury, then I would be okay rolling with Forte. Or if it turns out, for example, that Forte gets hurt, for example. So I would watch the injury report, check it out Friday. If all 3 of them are healthy and play, I think what's going to do is they're just going to steal carries from one another. That's a lot of mouths to feed in terms of the running backs. And so I just shy away from those. As far as wideouts go, Jarvis Landry has PPR value, hasn't had over 100 yards yet, but he will get a lot of looks. He is kind of their safety valve there. So if you have him, you can start him. He's not a great pick, but he's decent. Now, Devontae Parker is the best wideout of all the wideouts on the field in this game, but I don't think he's going to play this week. All indications are he's going to miss another game with an ankle injury. You look at the wideouts for the Jets, you got Curley, Curson, Anderson. This is another one where it's a very confusing situation to figure out. Now, all 3 of those had decent weeks last week, but it was against a terrible New England pass defense. They distribute the ball pretty evenly, and so it's hard to really pin down who you could trust. Of the three, probably Curse is the best of the three. I would rather look elsewhere for somebody that I feel more comfortable and has more consistency. As far as tight ends go, Austin Severian Jenkins is getting better and better each week. Last week he had a touchdown, 8 catches, and I think he had around 46 yards. Would have had a second touchdown, but they called it back. And so this is a guy that's really come on. He's an athlete. He's got great gifts, skills. So they love this guy. Austin Severian Jenkins, you need to start. I would sit Thomas. As far as kickers go, Chandler Catanzaro and Cody Parker are below average starts. You could start them, but they're not great starts. And both defenses are actually decent plays this week. Miami and the Jets are decent plays if you need a defense. Ravens and the Vikings. So as quarterback play go, I would sit Case Keenum and I would sit Joe Flacco. Flacco has been awful this year. He's got 4 TD passes to 8 interceptions. They're really struggling to move the ball, and they're playing a Minnesota defense that's really, really good against the pass. I think they're third as far as fewest points allowed to quarterbacks. So I would sit both quarterbacks. As far as running backs go, got to start Jerick McKinnon. Now, Jerick McKinnon, he's actually been really good against the run so far, surprisingly. Though I do think that's going to slow down a little bit. His yards per carry will dip a little bit. The nice thing about him, he's got great hands, so he's relevant in the passing game. And just like I talked about with Hunt earlier, even if he's not running the ball well, even if his yards per carry are down, he's got very good hands that are going to involve him, and that keeps him relevant in every game. It keeps him effective, and it keeps him producing. So you guys go with Jerick McKinnon. As far as Baltimore running backs go, I would start Allen if there are no better options out there. He has good hands, so that kind of tilts him into that start region. And he's a guy that's going to see probably about 8 to 10 carries, 5 or 6 targets in the passing game. I would sit Latavius Murray. And then you have Alec Collins of Baltimore. Alec Collins has actually had great yards per carry this year. He's the best of all the running backs on that team. You should see more carries, more touches. For whatever reason, they're hesitant to get in the ball. Maybe because early in the year he fumbled a few times. I'm not really sure. But he's playing a Minnesota defense that gives up the second fewest points to backs. And so Alec Collins is a really risky pick to start at this week. As far as wideout goes, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs, when he's healthy, has been really good. Now he's a little banged up. He's struggled staying healthy his whole career. Keep an eye on him. But if he's healthy, he's a guy that you want to play. Adam Thielen's a guy that you want to play. They both sit at about, I would say Diggs is a wide receiver 2-3, and Adam Thielen is a wide receiver 3 at this point. I would say Wallace. He's facing Minnesota defense that's very good against the pass, and most likely he's going to line up against shutdown corner Xavier Rhodes. So I would sit Wallace. I would sit Macklin. As far as tight ends go, I would start Kyle Rudolph. I would sit all Baltimore tight ends. As far as kickers go, you got to start Tucker. Tucker's a stud. He's a great kicker. You can start Forbath. He's a decent start, but not a great start this week. And as far as defenses go, actually both defenses are good plays, especially Minnesota. In fact, Minnesota, according to a lot of sites, is the #1 defense out there this week. He's certainly top 3. So both defenses are good starts. The Cowboys versus the Niners. You guys start Dak Prescott. Week 1, he looked a little bit quiet, but he's been getting better and better. The guy's the real deal. He's solid. So he's got a great matchup this week. I would go with Dak. I would sit C.J. Beathard. Now, C.J. Beathard's actually got a decent matchup against Dallas, who gives up, I think, the 8th most points to quarterbacks. But here's the thing. He's a rookie in his first ever start, and there's just a lot of question marks surrounding him. In terms of weapons, he's got average weapons at best. Pierre Garçon's a decent wideout beyond that. He doesn't have a ton of great weapons there. And so a rookie, first start ever, average weapons, I'd rather look elsewhere in terms of who I would start this week. As far as running backs go, you got to start Elliott. Of course, the whole suspension thing, he is going to play this week, so you got to go with Ezekiel Elliott. I would start Carlos Hyde. As far as wideouts go, I'd start Pierre Garçon and Dez Bryant. Now, you look at Aldrick Robinson, Cole Beasley, and Goodwin are the other wideouts out there that kind of come to mind. Now, all 3 of those, another one, are hard to pin down. Goodwin he was actually a track star, converted to wideout, and played football, obviously. But really, he's a guy that stretches the field. He's a hit-or-miss guy that'll go 100 yards on 4 catches, and then he'll disappear for 3 or 4 games. So he's a question mark. Cole Beasley, if you look at him, his touchdowns are okay this year, but he hasn't had a lot of targets, and he hasn't had a lot of yardage. Aldrick Robinson had a good week last week, but all 3 of these guys have a lot of question marks. They're really hard to trust at this point, so I probably would go elsewhere. Tight end, you got to start George Kittle, and Mark Whitten. Kickers, Dan Bailey's a great start this week. You got to start Dan Bailey. And Gould is a good start, but with the rookie quarterback, once again, there's a decent chance that the rookie could struggle to move the ball, and Gould really becomes irrelevant. Another thing that might happen too is Dallas could run out ahead of this game. It could be a blowout, which would require San Francisco to throw the ball and stop kicking field goals, stuff like that. So I would sit Gould. How about Seattle and the Giants? Well, at quarterback, you got to start Russell Wilson. Right now, they don't have a running game at all. They've been terrible running the ball, and so all they can do is pass. The offensive line is showing improvement, and so Russell Wilson's a good start this week. I would sit Manning. Eli, all of his weapons are injured. Sound like Sterling Shepard's not going to be back this week. That really just leaves him Evan Ingram. Last week he did okay. He did just enough to win the game. They tried not to throw the ball a lot. And he's playing a Seattle defense that's playing very well right now, so sit Eli Manning. As far as running backs go, Orleans Darkwa had a really good game, and he's become the lead back there, and so you got to start him. Now, he's probably not going to have a great yards per carry in this game, but I think he's going to see 25 carries around that. I'm sure they're going to want to take pressure off of Eli and take pressure off that pass rush, so Orleans Darkwa is going to see the ball a lot. I would probably sit all other running backs in this game. I wouldn't start any running backs for Seattle, and the other options for the Giants seem to be that favorable. As far as wideouts go, I'd start Baldwin. I would sit Lockett, Lewis, you name it. Baldwin's the only guy you can really trust at this point. As far as tight ends go, you got to start Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram's going to get a lot of targets in the passing game. He's the best weapon to have out there. In fact, Evan Ingram has Gronk-type talent. He's very good. We talked about him in the preseason. They love this guy, and so he's really developed into a legitimate top 10 tight end. Another guy you need to start is Jimmy Graham. As far as kickers go, I would start Walsh. I would sit Rosas, the kicker for the Giants. As far as defenses go, you got to start Seattle. Definitely start Seattle's defense in this game. And the New York Giants are an okay start. They're not a great start. They're okay. Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. Well, let's look at the quarterbacks first. Big Ben. If you need to start him, you could. I think what's going to happen in this game is going to be a heavy dose of Le'Veon Bell. Big Ben has struggled a little bit. Came off his 5-pick game 2 weeks ago. Last week he hasn't been that great. But he is Big Ben, and he's a guy that could go and get you 300 yards, 340 TDs. He's got that sort of talent. So I wouldn't say to sit him necessarily, but you need to temper your expectations with him. I would sit Dalton. Andy Dalton right now is playing a Pittsburgh defense that's stingy as far as allowing quarterback points, so I would sit him. As far as running backs go, you start Le'Veon Bell. That's a no-brainer. And I would start Mixon. Pittsburgh's defense is really good, but they do give up points to running backs. And Mixon's looked better the last couple of weeks in the running game. And so I would definitely start Mixon. I would sit Hill and Bernard. As far as wideouts go, you got to go with A.J. Green. He's a stud. You start him. Antonio Brown. You never sit those guys. Once again, A.J. Green, Brown, you start them all the time. Doesn't matter who they're playing. I would sit Bryant. Now, Juju Smith-Schuster is a guy that is right on the bubble there, but Cincinnati's not bad at it. They have a decent pass defense, and so until he's seen more carries, he gets more involved. I would sit Juju Smith-Schuster this week. As far as tight ends go, you could start Tyler Kroft. Now, Tyler Eifert's going to be out for the year, and so Cincinnati loves to use their tight ends, so it's kind of a guy that they really is their safe together check down guy, so I would go with Tyler Kroft. As far as kickers go, both kickers are risky starts this week. As far as defense, I would start Pittsburgh. And as far as Cincinnati goes, now 2 of the last 3 weeks, Cincinnati's had 6 sacks, so they're getting to the quarterback. Their defense is playing decent, so Cincinnati's not a bad start against Ben Roethlisberger. Denver versus the Chargers. Well, you can start Rivers, but I want to lower your expectations. One, he's a gunslinger, so if you're in a league where they minus points for interceptions, you probably don't want to start him. But he's a guy that's probably going to throw the ball up there a lot, take his chances. I would say Trevor Siemian. Trevor Siemian hasn't been that good. Running backs go, you got to start Gordon, and I would start C.J. Anderson and Charles. Now, what's happening with the two of them is they're guys you could start this week, but both Anderson and Charles, they're kind of splitting carries at this point, and so because they do that, they really fall into kind of running back 3 status. So they're guys that you could start, but they're not going to be great starts. As far as wideouts go, Demaryius Thomas had a good week last week. He had his best week by far. I think he had 10 receptions, 133 yards, I believe. Now, he did tweak his ankle last week, but all reports are he's going to be able to play. And Trevor loves to go to him, and Emmanuel Sanders is going to be out with an injury. And so that's going to be a lot of targets for Thomas. You got to start him. I would start Keenan Allen, although he's going to have a tough go of it against a good Denver defense. But someone's got to get the targets, and he's their number 1 wide out there. I would say Taylor, Williams, Benjamin, others. Now, here's the issue with the wide receivers for Chargers. You got Williams, you got Benjamin. At times they've looked good. 1, they're playing Denver. Denver's very good against the pass. 2, first-round pick Mike Williams came back last week, and I think week after week you're going to see him get more and more involved in the offense. And before you know, it's only a matter of time before he's the number 2 wide out there to Keenan Allen. He's going to pass up Ty Williams and Benjamin. And so now those guys are good options to start. As far as tight ends go, you would start Hunter Henry. Don't start any tight ends for Denver. As far as kickers go, the The kicker for Denver is struggling. I would sit him, and Novak is safe, but not a great option at kicker for the Chargers. As far as defenses go, Denver's a good start this week. You got to start them. And Chargers put good pressure on the quarterback. In fact, in week 1 when they played Denver in Denver, they got 8 points. And so Chargers aren't a bad start this week. Atlanta versus New England, a matchup of the Super Bowl last year. And so where do you go with it? Well, you're going to start Ryan. New England's pass defense is terrible. Matt Ryan has a great matchup this week. You got to start him. I'm not a big Matt Ryan fan. In fact, going into this year, we actually cautioned you that last year was kind of an aberration and that he was going to have a step back year. And sure enough, he is. He's really struggling. But against New England this week, he should tear it up. You got to start Brady. As far as running backs go, you can start Freeman. Coleman's a good start this week. We think he'll have a decent one. They involve him a lot in the passing game. He's a solid running back. In fact, he's one injury away to Freeman. If Freeman were to get injured, Coleman would become a top 10 running back. I would start Dion Lewis. Now, right now, Mike Gillislee is a guy that I would sit, and Mike is really struggling. He's really touchdown dependent, and the guy that's been getting more and more carries is Dion Lewis. In fact, last 2 weeks he's had 50 yards rushing. He also has good hands, so they can involve him in the passing game. So start Dion Lewis, sit Gillislee. You have White for New England. You could start him in a PPR league. That's a little bit of a stretch of a start there. You could if you have to. I'd rather go elsewhere. As far as wideouts go, you start Cooks, Julio Jones, Hogan are guys that you have to start. Now, between Sanu and Gabriel, they actually have a good matchup this week. I would like to start one of those wideouts, but here's where I'm at with it. Sanu may play. He's injured. I'm not sure. Now, if he starts and he plays, he's a guy that I would start. If he sits, then I would be comfortable with Gabriel. But if Sanu plays, I would sit Gabriel. So once again, it really comes down to Sanu's health. If he plays, he's a viable start. If he sits, then I would go with Gabriel, but they have a good matchup in that game against a terrible New England pass defense. I would sit Danny Amendola simply because you just don't know how many targets he's actually going to get in this offense. You got Gronk, you've got Cooks, Hogan, the running backs. He's really like the 4th or 5th option in that offense. Hooper. You got to start Hooper this week. He's come alive the last 2 weeks. He's had 16 targets, and he has a great matchup. So start Hooper at tight end along with Gronk. As far as kickers go, with Bryan and Gostkowski are both great starts this week. And don't start either defense. Sit these defenses this week. Neither one of them are good options. The Redskins versus the Eagles. Well, as far as quarterback plays go, both Cousin and Wentz are starts in this game. As far as running backs go, Blunt is a guy that you want to start. He's had double-digit carries every game except for one. He's saved for 15 carries in this game. Chris Thompson is a guy who's looking really good, especially in PPR leagues. Now, in standard league, he doesn't quite as much value. Robert Kelly is another one that we don't know if he's going to play or not. He's been, I think, overcoming a rib injury, I believe it is. I'm not sure exactly. Check on that, but he is injured at this point anyways, and he's questionable for this week. If he starts and if he plays, I would start him. Robert Kelly will move right into that role. Samaje Perine has been brutal. His yards per carry, I think, is around 3.2. He's been bad. And so Robert Kelly is a guy that if he starts, you could play him. As far as wideouts go, Jeffrey. You have to look at the health of Josh Norman. I think he missed last week. Now, if Josh Norman plays, I would sit Jeffrey. Jeffrey's not a good start. Josh Norman's a shutdown corner. Aguilar is not bad as number 3 wideout this week. And then you got Terrell Pryor, who has a good matchup, but he's disappointed at this point. But Terrell Pryor has a good matchup. He sits at about a wide receiver 3. He's a guy that you could play. I would rest Crowder, Grant, Doxson, Smith. All these guys, there's no consistency in them, and so there's just a lot of question marks there. As far as tight ends go, you guys got Zach Ertz, and I believe right now he leads all tight ends in terms of catches and yards. I would say Vernon Davis, unless Reed's out, but it sounds like Reed's going to play. Obviously, you got to start Reed. He's a good start there. Kickers go, Jake Elliott is money. This guy's a great kicker. You got to start him. And right now they're looking to sign somebody to replace Hopkins, who went on the IR as far as kickers for Washington. So I wouldn't start whatever Washington kicker. As far as defense, you could start Philadelphia, but I would sit Washington. So those are some things for you to consider. Once again, it's hard to me to understand all the details as far as your scoring system, your bench depth. There's so many factors that I can't take into account when I make these videos. But if you want specific answers to specific information, go ahead at the bottom of the video. Send us a question. We'd love to answer it for you. We'll break it down as far as matchups. Maybe you guys want to pick up, trade, drop, whatever it is. We'd love to answer that. Put it on the video. We will get back to you. Thanks again for checking us out, the Fantasy Football Prophets. God bless.